Aphoristic Appendage to On Truthtelling. 101 to 150. 101. What is generally considered to be true, and what is generally considered to be good, form complex fields of interests and beliefs that, however much they overlap, never quite coincide. 102. It is more truthful to be negative than positive to the extent that, going beyond all valuations of a more or less positive nature, it is admitted that the negative is integral to them. 103. Loose talk will always be with us as much as learned discourse insofar as the world forever falls short of being a monastery, a courtroom, a laboratory, and a classroom, of epic proportions. 104. When all is said and done, one is valued according to the contribution one makes to the moment. At the same time, this contribution can vary greatly, extending even to the dead and their participation. 105. The great prejudice and optical illusion that puts us at the center of things persists even in the face of now knowing we're but a speck in the universe. The saving grace seems to be that the singularity of ourselves as this speck, our special way of being as this speck, the myriad interpretations we have of ourselves as this speck, all this leaves little room for thinking we're just this speck and nothing else, that it's not possible we're in fact much more than this speck and, indeed, a speck that, if understood correctly, is at the center of things. 106. Perhaps no human being, in his own lifetime, has been more exalted and deified than Ramses II. And yet we all know that, at a certain point in history, his monuments were buried in sand and his name almost forgotten. 107. In politics, both hypocrisy and hyperbole are the order of the day. In wartime, it goes even further, they are raised to the status of virtues. 108. When making a difficult or dubious decision, perhaps one should ask, will I be able to live with this decision for the rest of my life? 109. There are things that even the wisest and most righteous person in the world won't reveal about himself. For would this person, whoever this person might be, want everyone else to know how much he fell short of being wise and righteous? 110. According to scientists, natural catastrophes on a global scale have occurred more than once and wiped out nearly all life on this planet. Such a prehistory, covering an immense span of time, suggests both a certain precariousness and a certain perdurability. While all life can be threatened at any time, the planet itself seems to have a good chance of surviving and even exploding with life after it's being nearly decimated. Now, given the state of affairs and the current threats of nuclear arms and global warming, wouldn't it be advisable to be more modest even in one's political thinking? Wouldn't it be the right thing, given that existential threats of a global nature will be with us for generations to come, to avoid making serious matters sound like a cosmic joke? In other words, instead of making "Save the Planet" the rallying cry of future generations, wouldn't it be advisable to have something less presumptuous and more authentic? Something that doesn't overstate our capacity to control the future and at the same time, doesn't try to mask our primarily egocentric concerns. Finally, something that would reach deep into our whole history and not simply speak idly about our modern-day role. Help us to save us from ourselves, whatever powers may be, and forgive us our trespasses, especially those against all other living creatures. 111. The human race is one long relay race. From generation to generation, the baton is passed, this business of continuing on with some things and starting anew with others. It is incessant and vigorous and, God only knows, in some ways mindless. It is the future as we see it, which is always limited in its revealing of itself, but sufficiently so nonetheless to fill us with hopes, dreams, and best wishes. 112. Much of our lives is spent wishing for this or that to make us a bit happier or to get rid of some inconvenience, discomfort, or heartache. Yet if we have a pain in our stomach that persists and persists, how much we would give up of this or that, even of what we formerly wished for, if only this would get rid of that. 113. Do you want to create something like a large-scale human family? Do you want the whole human race to act in a much closer, more congenial, and caring way? Well, then, let each and everyone go out and sojourn with as many people as possible, in as many different lands as possible, and over as many years as possible. Let each and everyone sit down with these people in a very intimate setting, listen to all their stories both good and bad, and avoid any sort of quick or easy judgments. Let this action be carried out and, for sure, within a few years, all tribalism and nationalism will lose their justification, all racial barriers will break down, and all prejudices will be robbed of the ground in which they spring up. But if you sense, as you may very well do, a problem here, if you protest that such an idea is wholly impractical, well, then, quite frankly, you've put your finger on the reason why the human race has never been a family. Certainly, it's not because the people of this world aren't capable of it. No, it's because the world, simply by being a world, forever imposes itself as distance. 114. There are people full of hatred who view others as not being entitled to their innocence and, if things reach a fever pitch, not being entitled to go without punishment. 115. What is a newspaper? It is many things, but one thing it never fails to be is a gossip column willing to exalt a person 1 minute and execrate him the next. 116. Youth is many glorious things, but it seldom is glorious wisdom. 117. The advantage of slogans, simple arguments, and rallying cries is that they influence, motivate, and galvanize people widely and even from one generation to the next. The disadvantage is that they are never an attempt, and here is their great shortcoming, to do justice to the complexity of a situation. As a consequence, they are inevitably challenged over time, it may take more than a few generations, and subject to being discarded, modified, or replaced. At the very least, they grow weaker in their effect, often becoming little more than platitudes. 118. Response to the world hater. It seems to me you want a judgment against the world with as little justification as the act of faith in it you condemn. 119. A. Most people don't have an original idea in their head. B. But perhaps they live a better life than you do. A. I have no way of contesting this point. 120. Are you worried about being emasculated by the opposite sex, dear sirs? Well, time has been doing this for hundreds of thousands of years to those who grow too old. 121. A. To give credit where credit is due, I'm entertained by the news, no matter how bad it is. B. How can one speak of entertainment if the news is horrible? A. By not paying attention to the moral objection implicit in your question, which I don't think is aimed at the enjoyment per se, but rather at the admission of such enjoyment. In other words, the feeling, emotion, state of mind, or whatever you want to call it is probably what a lot of people, including yourself, experience. So, what you're truly objecting to is an admission that doesn't come with contrition, that doesn't register this enjoyment of bad news, even horrible news, as a sort of secret sin. B. Well, isn't that precisely what it is, no matter how many people you want to tar with the same brush? A. I see you're excited and, since I haven't much time, I'll simply say that these matters touch on both psychology and theology. If you're in the psychology camp as I am, then the answer to your question is no. If you're in the theology camp as you seem to be, then the answer is yes. B. Theology. Good heavens, what are you talking about? A. Sin and going to heaven and being good and all that sort of thing. Anyway, I've told you where I stand. Now I've got to go. 122. Taking a stand on current issues is rightly treated as a virtue that many should adopt but wrongly as a principle that all should follow. 123. Do glorious summer days need cold dreary ones to be truly appreciated? There is this story that a young man named Akhenaten went on a mysterious voyage with his father that took them over land and sea. Shortly after they came back to Egypt, his father died and Akhenaten, now the supreme ruler of Egypt, overthrew all the traditional gods and, to the consternation of many, made sun worship the state religion. 124. Societies that attain a high level of moral development but, at the same time, wreak death and destruction in other parts of the world are, to say the least, setting themselves up for a fall. 125. If well expressed and not threatening our convictions, a point of view different from our own can be, when duly considered, not only tolerable but pleasurable. 126. An aphorism doesn't state with certainty what is hardly ever certain. This is an advantage to the extent that even the most refined illusions have limited benefits. 127. A. The word terrorist gets a lot of play these days. B. Yes, similar to words in the past like blasphemer, witch, and unbeliever. A. Are you suggesting that, like these words, it will eventually lose its effectiveness? B. That, my friend, doesn't require a crystal ball to predict. 128. A. Love is the highest word for me. Love. 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 B. I hate to disagree with you, my friend, but love for me is not the highest word. It's too nebulous, too overused, too, I might even say, pretentious. A. Well then, what for you is the highest word? B. I've already said it, friend. 129. When the last glimmer of sexual attraction is absent, when the face is wrinkled or faded, we perceive the loss in ourselves or in others, and we mourn. 130. Let us not fool ourselves. When it comes to sheer aggression, there's still enough difference between men and women that, in a war where the battlefield remains the dominant theater, it will hardly register as a dismissible factor. 131. Blaming the world for, in whatever way imaginable, coming to an end is like blaming one's body for not holding up indefinitely. 132. And, lo, a great miracle befell the earth. All weapons were renounced, all wealth distributed equally, all fear and hatred banished from the hearts of men. And all that pertains to health, happiness, and security was finally given to each and every one of the inhabitants of this planet and, behold, as a lesser miracle that all could well appreciate, all could even go so far as to celebrate given how different things had been in every part of the world and over a long period of time, as a lesser miracle, I say, there was this strange secondary effect of there being nothing left, in this now perfect world, to report on the evening news. 133. Motto of today's world, do good but net a profit. 134. You have the flavor of what you created in your mouth. It stays sweet for a while. But then the flavor is finally lost, the mouth is dry, and you must start over again. 135. If the term fake news means not giving a balanced account of matters and events of mostly a political nature, then it's merely the rechristening of a very old practice. 136. It is not so difficult to determine where highest wisdom and greatest stupidity come together. It is the point at which the world would be ruined either by abandoning the search for the greatest good or by universally applying it. 137. Viewing the world as infinitely complex is essentially at odds with viewing ourselves as its master controllers. Yet the second view is probably as necessary as the first from the standpoint that, by shuttling between these two views, we can avoid a totally pessimistic outlook as much as a totally foolish one. 138. For some of us but by no means all, our relationship with friends and family, as dear as it is superseded by another, our relationship with the world. 139. One way to get rid of a bad conscience is to look out over the world, see evil wherever one can find it, imagine it where it doesn't exist, exaggerate it where it does exist, and then say to oneself, you see, I have no right to my guilty conscience. 140. So many people say this or that and so many people talk through their hat. 141. Given that the world is forever changing, the good that views itself as definitive and final must inevitably find itself falling short. 142. There is nothing more common than people who, waving the banner of justice, find reason to perpetrate their own forms of injustice. 143. The good, like gold, is a malleable metal. It can take many forms, lend itself to many uses, and even mix with base elements. 144. Generally speaking, it's easy to feed a prejudice because there are so many facts to support it among all those that don't but can be conveniently ignored. 145. Having a prejudice is an inescapable principle if having principles is itself a respectable version of the former. 146. All minor things of the world, if taken together, are of such colossal importance that all great events, even if taken together, are dwarfed by them. 147. To be invisible is not to be unimportant. It is simply to be invisible. 148. What is the ego? A soap bubble that extends itself to the limits of the universe. 149. What is life? Pristine moments among a lot of other stuff that isn't always agreeable or attractive. 150. What is death? A cliché.